So with every set, I typically do some sort of video on some budget decks, and today we're going to be diving into some budget decks that are based from Strixhaven. And I would say Strixhaven probably was a little bit trickier, I guess, to come up with budget decks based on a lot of the themes that come from Strixhaven. Just in fact that a lot of things, to me at least at first glance, wasn't very, obvious. So in today's video, we're going to go over 4 decks that I did come up with and create. I did get some gameplay in each of these decks to kind of see how they play out. They do play fairly okay at the moment. I would say they do need some tweaks as you kind of progress through and maybe want to decide to upgrade them as we are playing budget. These decks do not have a lot of rares, but hey everyone, Scar TV coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we diving into some budget decks, diving into the new Strixhaven set, seeing how that is. If you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, when I know post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button. Until that, let's dive into the video. Real quick before we dive into Strixhaven, don't forget to go to the store, go to the top right hand corner if you are on desktop, and hit play Strixhaven. I think the other way around is going online to your actual Wizards website on mobile, logging in with your account that's linked to MTG Arena, and then there's a part in there that says redeem codes. You enter play Strixhaven there, you can redeem codes on mobile. They haven't implemented the whole type in info box like so on mobile, so that's the other workaround. I know I've posted it on various areas where people ask me questions before to redeem. In case you want to do that, hit enter, redeem your code, get your 3 free packs of Strixhaven without paying a single dollar, and open them up and see what you get. So the first deck up on the list is a deck list that I feel like I may have created before, but today we've infused a lot of Strixhaven cards into it, and that is Izzet Spells. Essentially, the deck kind of revolves around playing a lot of non-creature spells to kind of pump up our creatures. But in doing so, I've kind of done a couple different little tricks and techniques in the deck to kind of give us that little bit of extra oomph that sometimes this deck lacks, especially on the budget. I do think that one of the cool tricks is actually playing these 2 high-costing instance and sorcery spell, each doing a unique ability. That this one creates 2 4/4 red and blue elemental creatures, while this one does 5 damage to any target. We get to look at top 5 because of our library. We get to put one of them into our hand and the rest of the bottom in our library in any order. But the thing, if you notice on the bottom of both of them, is that we can actually tap 2 mana, discard these cards, and actually create a treasure token. And the reason why this is a pretty unique trick, especially if you need to filter particular mana, is that you can actually get them back with a couple cards that we do add into the deck. One of them being Experimental Overlord, because we are playing non-creature spells in the deck for a good chunk of it. This card can get cards back from our graveyard to our hand, so this is a one way to return those cards back, and then we get a XX blue red weird creature token where X is number of instance of sorcery cards based in our graveyard. Another one being is we actually added in the Lord Drakis into the deck. Just another unique kind of thing here. You know, whenever he mutates, we get to return target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. Just another thing to add it in there. You can add it onto some of our base creatures in the deck, something like our Sprite Dragon, because it creates the base power and toughness up to 2/3 if we want to put it over. And then it gets the additional +1/+1 counters. Same thing with the Weird, I believe. Or actually, never mind. The weird is just an XX, so you would actually cancel that. So don't me on that one. But other than that, I mean, the general basis of this is pretty straightforward to the deck. The one other card that we have in here as a creature is actually Prismari Apprentice. It's a 2 mana 2/2 with Magecraft, and whenever we cast this copy of a spell, instant sorcery spell, it can't be blocked this turn, and mana value was 5 or greater. Put a +1/+1 counter on Prismari Apprentice. Interesting card here to get some free damage in if we make it unblockable. Definitely pretty cool. One cool thing is I did get the new art for the Opt, so definitely cool there. But we have 4 copies of Opt to kind of, get our little bit of scry and draw a card to kind of help our non-creature spells in the turn 1 phase. We play Blitz the Thunder Raptor as that kind of like X damage to target creature, exile instead of putting it in the graveyard. And it gets stronger and stronger the more instants and sorceries we have in our graveyard. We have Raking Claws in the deck just because, we kind of want to maybe do one of those like kind of one-hit combo type things, give target creature double striking until end of turn. If we need something, we can always cycle it for 2. Unleash Furies, because as much as this is kind of like one way to finish off our opponent, I kind of want to go the other way and kind of play some of these more unique top-end cards. But we do have Unleash Fury in here if we want to try to go for that one-hit combo. Same thing with Dual Strike. Yet again, another card to kind of, copy certain spells, whether it's copying, an Unleashed Fury or maybe a Blitz of the Thunder Raptor. But yet again, you can also even copy something like an Experimental Overlord, getting 2 tokens, again, 2 cards back from your graveyard. Can't copy any of your high-end cards, but definitely an interesting card to kind of copy some of your lower-end things because it does copy anything 4 or less. Definitely pretty cool there. We do have 2 copies of Bone Crusher Giant just for that stomp ability, and also for 3 that, you know, inflicts damage upon your opponent. Lord Drakis, of course, like I said, to get things back from the graveyard. Expel Overlord. Practical Research is a new card that I'm kind of messing around with. It's interesting in the fact it's a 5-mana draw 4 cards. Discard 2 cards unless you discard an instant or sorcery card. Definitely a good way to dig a little bit deeper into your deck. In a way, we do, like I said, play a lot of instants and sorcery, so definitely a good way to discard something and draw on 3 cards out of it, which is definitely pretty good. Pretty decent at instant speed, I think, for 5 mana. And then, like I said, we have these 2 cards, Elemental Masterpiece and also Creative Outburst. The one thing I would say, I am going to tweak the mana just a little bit, as we are playing a pretty fair balance of both red and, I guess we're a little bit heavier on the red, but we are playing a pretty decent split between islands and mountains. I think I'm going to add in another set of duels. Also, throw it out there, these duels did come with Strixhaven. They are tap lands, dual lands that create blue and red mana. Also has the ability to tap 4, you can scry 1, which is definitely pretty good, especially if you don't have like the Castle Vantress, which is like the rare version, scry 2 cards for 4 mana. So definitely a good common version of it in a way, so definitely good for the deck. But overall, the deck plays pretty fun. It definitely has a pretty interesting, unique ability. I do think the idea of, you know, discarding these in the early game to maybe get a little extra ramp and then bring them back later in the game with a Lord Drakis or even Expel Overlord is always very good. It does create some unique, interesting routes you can kind of go when it comes to actually playing against your opponent overall. Other thing, I don't know what happened here, but for some reason I just realized that it's the green creature that came. That's, I think, the green-white flip card. But we're just going to put this on there just so it shows Izzet. But that is the first deck, and I do find it pretty interesting. This one's maybe not very Strixhaven heavy, but I do find it's a decent split to actually add in some of the unique new cards. Now, this next deck is actually a fairly interesting one. Yet again, it is pretty Strixhaven based for the most part, and we are actually trying to go on that whole spirit thing. With Strixhaven, we did get a lot of things that kind of pump spirits. We do have this Quintonus Fiend Historian. It's a legendary creature Elephant Cleric that spirits we control get +1/+0, and whenever 1 or more cards leave our graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit token, which I do find pretty interesting. And I do play a couple cards in the deck that you know, will remove things or get things back from the graveyard, which will then trigger this. So going over the cards we have, we first got Guiding Voice. It put a +1/+1 counter on target creature at sorcery speed, and then we learn. We do have a learn sideboard. I do only have 4 cards in the learn sideboard, but you're free to add in more. I just figured we add in these, but you can add in other lessons if you want to. Then we got Sentinel's Eyes. This is one of the cards that actually allows us to kind of get a card back from our graveyard. Kind of trigger one of those abilities if a card leaves our graveyard. So definitely pretty interesting there. Definitely giving something +1/+1 to Vigilance. Always very good. We got Usher of the Fallen just to kind of create some tokens. Sure, they're not spirit tokens, but the Usher of the Fallen itself is a spirit. So for 1 mana, it's a pretty decent 1-drop. Valor of the Worthy. It's just a unique card here. Maybe 4 copies is maybe too much, but the idea here is if our creature that we put this on dies, we get a 1/1 spirit token with flying. The other thing I was thinking that you could also play if you do have is that 2-mana card that came from Kaldheim last set. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but whenever it comes into the battlefield, creatures of a chosen type get +1/+1. Definitely a pretty good card to possibly add in here. It is white mana, so definitely a good idea possibly if that's what you want to do and go like spirit like all the way. Escape the Velocity is a 1-mana enchant creature +1/+0. It has haste, escape for 2. Another card here that I kind of add into the deck just because I do think that you're still going to go against some of the more common decks in the format, and this is kind of like that little bit of extra rogue protection. So that and Sentinel's Eyes allows us to kind of, you know, escape some cards from the graveyard, kind of thin down our graveyard just in case if our opponent is playing things that mill things into our graveyard and taking advantage of us having X amount of cards in our graveyard. So it's kind of that escape stuff to kind of get stuff back. Then we got Clarion Spirit. Most of the deck itself is actually on the fairly cheap side. It's a 2-mana creature that's a spirit, and then when we cast our second spell each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit token with flying. So just a good way to pump out some spirit tokens. As you can kind of see here, most of the deck is kind of like that spirit generator. So that is definitely good there. Then we got Professor of Symbology. It's a 2/1 Professor, core cleric. When it enters battlefield, we get to learn. It's just another card to have learn on. In it itself, it's not a spirit, but I do like the idea of, you know, us being able to get into our learn board. Like I said, I do kind of want to mess around with it and kind of see how learn is, but it's just something pretty interesting to kind of do. Then we have 2 copies of Rip Apart. This is one of those things I was thinking that maybe we want to add in 3 or 4 copies. It is kind of unique in the fact that it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So if your opponent's playing a more aggressive deck, you can deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker at sorcery speed, which is the one downfall. And then you can also choose to destroy target artifact or enchantment, which is definitely another interesting thing, especially depending on how the format goes. You may see more artifacts and enchantments pop up, but definitely a good, you know, unique card that has 2 different abilities and maybe get some unique get some playability regardless of what style of deck your opponent's playing. Then we have Throne Discovery here. It's a 2-mana sorcery card that we gain 2 life. We may discard 2 cards. If we do, we get to draw 3 cards. So another interesting one that I was messing around with. I only have 2 copies in there because, you know, the idea of discarding 2 cards to possibly get 3 cards is kind of drastic. So I didn't want to add too many copies, but definitely really interesting. And also the life gain is always a plus benefit for 2 mana. So definitely an interesting card to mess around with and see how that works out. Then we have the Pilgrim of the Ages. It's a 3-mana 2/1, nothing super crazy, but I do like the idea here. This is another card that we can get back from our graveyard when we start ramping up pretty good. It also searches for basic planes and we get to put it into our hand, which is also another good way. It's a spirit itself. We can tap 6 mana, we can return it from our graveyard to our hand, so another thing to trigger whenever a creature, whenever one or more cards leave our graveyard, you know, we get to trigger something. Next, going into the next card, which is a Stonebound Mentor. It's a 3-mana 3/3, which in and itself is a pretty decent card for budget value. And then whenever one or more cards leave our graveyard, scry 1. So any of our cards that, you know, escape or, you know, we can make them leave the graveyard, we're going to get this ability. And scrying is always a good card there. So the rares, the other rare I added into the deck, one of the rares I think I added into the deck is actually Blade Historian. This is actually fairly interesting because we're going to have a lot of tokens. And I do like the idea that attacking creatures we control have double strike. So that is actually one of those reasons why I have him here, just because it makes our creatures more aggressive overall, especially even if they're smaller. So just an overall pretty interesting card to have to give them double strike, just make us more aggressive. Definitely a pretty good card there. Then we got, like I said, the Field Historian. You know, our spirit like Lord, I guess. It's gonna give our spirits that little extra power. And then, you know, whenever one of our more cards leave the graveyard, we get a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So definitely a good way to maybe try to pump out some more spirits. And those spirits that come into play from this card are going to be 4/2s because of the +1/+0. Then the Return the Past Caller, another interesting card here. Overall, it's a 6-mana spell, 4/2. When it enters the battlefield, return target spirit, instant, or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand. So definitely a good way to get some of back our early game that may have, you know, been thrown in there. So definitely really interesting there. One thing I did actually not see that I thought I had in the deck was another card that was a rare. Hold on. I thought I had another rare. Did I not have one? I don't know. I'll take a quick look at this, but I thought there was another rare that whenever I attack, I get to untap a thing. But I may be thinking another deck that has white in it, so maybe not this one. But the mana base is pretty straightforward. This is kind of like how I would say in the basic way on how to play dual colors. 8 plains, 4 mountains, 4 of the Lorehold campuses, yet again, has a scry ability in the later game, can always be very effective, trying to look for our answer. Windscarred Crag has more tap mana that also has, you know, gain on life ability. And then Evolve and Wilds, so, you know, filter our mana in case we need a particular color. As there, you know, there isn't anything that's too crazy in a particular color, but, you know, sometimes you get more plains than mountains, so you maybe want more mountains, so vice versa. I'm looking at our lesson board. I just have Spirit of Summon in right now in the lesson board. Just a 3-mana lesson that, you know, you create a 3/2 red white spirit token on the battlefield. Definitely a good card there. I think I'm gonna add in 3 more cards to that lesson board, which I guess I'll do live right here. So let's just search lesson real quick if I can spell. I mean, we don't want something like that because that's not gonna help us. Start from scratch is interesting, but I don't think it's that great. Eliminate Historian, just getting no cards, draw that many cards. If there are 7 more cards in your graveyard, create. This could actually be fairly interesting, I think. Maybe we'll just add in 2 copies of this. So I'll have to create 2 more. And is there anything else that creates any spirits? I already have 4 copies of that. Try to scry 2 and draw a card for 3 mana. Why don't we just get this one? No. Wait, did I just put all those cards in my deck? Let's just do this real quick. Let's go to our spirit board. I'm going to get this one because, you know, you never know what your opponent's going to play. And then we'll just do 2 copies of this. And I think that will actually be pretty good for our spirit board. But overall, like I said, the deck is fairly interesting. I do think the deck maybe can use some tweaking. I do think there's some rares I didn't add in just to kind of keep it on that budget side that you could always add in. I mean, I'm always open to feedback. So, I mean, if you guys, you know, build this deck and then you start adding some rares that you think will work, let me know. I mean, I'm always interested on hearing what you guys have done for the deck. Yes. That's fine. I don't know why it's not, it didn't have this ability, but we'll finish the deck and that's there. All right, so here we have Orzhov Warlocks. This is actually a fairly interesting one with call time. With Strixhaven, we actually got a lot of new Warlocks, I guess, because, you know, with it being like a based on Magic School, I guess Warlocks and Sorcerers are kind of like a big thing with this set, and Wizards. So therefore, I decided to build around the Warlocks that we got introduced to. So this one is actually fairly Strixhaven heavy. I don't really think there's any cards outside maybe some of the land cards that are not from the set. For most of the deck here, it is actually cards from Strixhaven. So we actually have a fairly interesting style of the deck. A lot of it, what we're going to do here is a lot of +1/+1 counters and the ability to transfer +1/+1 counters when things die. It's kind of our strategy for the most part. So a lot of the cards you'll see here will have the ability when they die, you'll transfer the counters to something else we control. So the idea is we want to have multiple things out on the field so we can do that. So first we have our Gilded Guiding Voice, which is a 1-mana sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and learn. We do have a learn sideboard. You know, we got Inkling Summon just because, you know, it's a black-white card that gets us 1 out of it with flying, which is definitely pretty good. We have Necrotic Fumes, which is a 3-mana spell that additional cost to cast a spell, exile target creature we control. And then we get the exile target creature or planeswalker, which is definitely very good, especially if we're on, you know, we're looking to answer maybe something our opponent play that's fairly large. And then, of course, we got 1 introduction to Annihilation, yet again, just to exile target non-land permanent, just so it's a little bit more on the open side, so depending on what your opponent's doing, whether it's enchantment, artifact, creature, planeswalker, whatever it is that's not a land, we get to exile it, though our opponent does get to then draw a card out of it. So definitely pretty tough drawback, but I do think it's maybe a one-off just in that one situation in case we need it. The next card up in the deck list is going to be Star Pupil. Enters battlefield with +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, we have to put its counters on target creature we control. So definitely a good way to transfer counters around. And 1 mana, pretty decent, so we have 4 copies. We got Show of Confidence, which is an interesting card here. When we cast a spell, copy it for each other instant or sorcery spell we've cast this turn. So it has this like ability that in Magic has been called Storm. So definitely interesting in that sense. So depending on how when you do play it, you may be able to play copies X amount of times based on how many things. So you know, our early game mana is not the greatest in helping us, you know, cast a bunch of spells and then casting this to then get X amount of copies. But you know, getting 2 or 3 triggers with it, it could be actually pretty good. So definitely pretty interesting for that. But the actual card does put a +1/+1 counter target creature, and it gains vigilance. So definitely a good way to kind of, you know, gain something to gain vigilance. Definitely pretty interesting there. Then we got Killian Ink Duelist. It's a 2-mana black-white card, 2/2 lifelink menace. Spells you control that target a creature costs 2 less to cast, which is actually another interesting card here in the sense that it's going to make our spells that kill our opponent's creatures cost 2 less to cast, and also our spells that target creatures we control, cost 2 less to cast. So it's actually going to make some of our cards cost overall cheaper. And you know, in doing so, I don't think we are playing anything here, which now thinking about it, maybe I want to, you know, maybe drop maybe some Inkling Summons if they don't do good. Go to our lessons and actually add in a lesson. I think that's actually 3 mana that will be pretty good in that situation. So I think we're going to actually add an Expanded Anatomy. Oh, no, not to the main deck, to the sideboard. Also, other side note, guys, if you haven't noticed and you've been building decks in Best of 1, we do have the new 7-card sideboard. I didn't mention that in the last deck. But now, actually thinking about it, this is actually going to be pretty interesting because this will make this lesson cost 1 mana, which is actually pretty beneficial to us. So definitely pretty good there. Let's close that out. Then we got Silverquill Apprentice. It's a 2-mana 2/2 yet again. Whenever we cast a copy or instant or sorcery spell, target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So this is a decent way to kind of give maybe a little more aggression. We have 4 copies in the deck. Give it to itself. But definitely a good way to make our creatures that much bigger in a way to get that little bit extra damage. And you combine this with something like that, you can give things multiple +1/+0s depending on, you know, how many copies of spells you've been playing. We got Spartan Regime. This is the card I thought was in my other deck, but is actually here. It's a 3-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, learn. So it's definitely another card to go into our sideboard and learn and grab one of those cards. Or we can actually discard a card and draw a card. I kind of always forget that's actually an ability. It's something I did go over in my mechanics video, but I actually forgot since then. Or we just don't do anything. But definitely a good idea to kind of keep our hand full by learning or discarding, kind of maybe drawing an answer. But whenever we attack, we get a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature, and we get to untap it. So definitely another good way to kind of put additional counters on creatures and also kind of keeping a creature back for blocking. So definitely a pretty interesting card. But we do have 2 copies because I think, put 2 rares of another kind in the deck as well, which is Sedgemoor Witch, which is a 3-mana 3/2 human warlock, has menace. It also has the new ability Ward. which your opponent has to pay 3 life to actually target it, or it's countered. So definitely pretty interesting there. And then whenever we cast a copy or an instant or a sorcery, we get create a 1/1 green white black or green black token pest creature. With when this creature dies, we gain a life. So definitely create some chump blockers out of it. And I mean, look at these guys. Look at them. As ugly as some people may see them, I actually find them pretty cute tokens. So definitely pretty cool there. Sure, they're green black tokens, but definitely pretty cool in that sense. Then we got the Shadewing Laureate. I can't enunciate that. I'm terrible at reading sometimes. But it's a 2/2 flyer, but whenever another creature control with flying dies, we get to put +1/+1 counter on target creature control. So just another way to spread some counters around. I think we have a fair amount of things with flying, not maybe a ton of things, but definitely another interesting way to give additional +1/+1 counters. Also, you know, if you have another one of these out on the battlefield, you can then technically trigger from that, but definitely interesting there. We got Exorbitant Elocution. It's a 4 mana sorcery. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature control. Other creatures you control will get +1/+1. So definitely a good way to kind of bump it up. Find that with our Killian, you know, it's going to cost us only a white and a black technically to do this, so definitely pretty good there. Then we get the Spiteful Squad. It's a 4 mana 0/0. Enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it when it dies, but it's counters on target creature control. So you get again another thing that's going to transfer counters around when it dies. Closing Statement. You may think about it. It's a very expensive card for 5 mana. But it costs 2 less to cast on our end step, which is interesting in a way because it's at the end of our turn, but before our opponent goes. So definitely interesting to cast like a spell that does something like this. But it destroys target creature or planeswalker you don't control. And then we get to put a +1/+1 counter up to 1 creature we control. So definitely interested in that part. But overall, a pretty good card. It's definitely going to be interesting how it plays out, just because, like I said, we get it for cheaper at the end of our turn. But also combine that with something like Killian, then we kind of get that benefit whenever. But then on top of it, we can actually get it for just the black and a white at the end of our turn. So definitely cheaper in that sense. So maybe in the long play, it could be a very good card for 2 mana that does something like this. I do think that could be very effective. And then I decided to add in the Owlin's Shield Mage. Yet again, it's the example, I think, of War that I did in my mechanics video. But yet again, another card's 5 mana 3/3 with flying, but has War that makes our opponent pay 3 life. So I do think the value is there in the sense that if our opponent tries to target directly, they have to pay life in order to remove it. And then the mana base is pretty straightforward. We have 7 plains, 7 swamps, 4 Scoured Barrens, 2 of the campus, and 4 of the Evolving Wilds. Overall, another interesting deck. It's definitely interesting here. I do think there's rares and stuff you can add in here that will help us with the +1/+1 counters. There are more Warlocks that are rares. I just didn't want to add in too many rares. Like, I kind of keep these budget. That's why I kind of did 2 and 2, just kind of give a little bit of flavor for both of these. There are also, I think, other, you know, Warlocks, like I said, that you can add into the deck that overall make it good. I may leave notes in the deck list down below for each deck if there's rares I do think to suggest. I just didn't want to mess up the lesson board because typically I throw things here that, you know, that you could always add in later at a later date. But I do think because now we're playing lessons, I can't really throw them in here, or it's going to make the, you know, this sideboard look crazy. And you're going to import it and then be like, wait, why do I have to add these cards? But overall, I mean, this is definitely a pretty interesting deck to play around with. Let me know what you guys think. All right, so the last deck in this one is more of a token deck that actually has an interesting flair to it. It's like a token ramp deck. And the idea here is we are actually playing these new creature types called Fractals, which essentially, if you look at any of these, they're like these cool snake creatures that actually are like crystal shards. So definitely pretty cool there. And a lot of them have base triggers based on how many lands we've either played or how many lands that are on the battlefield or how many instances of sorceries we may have in our exile and or graveyard. So definitely interested there overall. And the way we do this is actually a few different ways. We don't have any 1-drops in this deck. I could see that being a problem maybe down the road just because we can't really be aggressive on turn 1. But our 2-drop slot is actually pretty full. So the first card we have here is Emergent Sequence. It's 2 mana, search our library for a basic land card. Put it on the battlefield tapped, which is actually fairly interesting here. So on turn 2, as long as you play like an untapped mana, that counts as 1. And then you play this, that counts as 2. And then for 2 mana, you then get Ramp Spell, then get a creature that's a 2/2, which is definitely very interesting there. Or you combine it with something like Evolving Wilds in the later game. You then get an extra trigger. If you have Fabled Passages, you can always add them, so you even get even more triggers to maybe set up a very large Emergent Sequence. But definitely in the early game, you get in a 2/2 and a mana ramp out of it for 2 mana. Definitely fairly strong, I do think. Another card I actually find interesting here is called Square Up. Target creature gets base power and toughness that's 4/4 until end of turn. Because we're playing tokens that get +1/+1 counters on them, you can actually make the base power and toughness from 0/0 to 4/4, which essentially gives it a 4 additional power to make them that much more aggressive. So definitely another interesting card for 2 mana. I do find it to be quite interesting in the late game, but also maybe catching your opponent by surprise by them not expecting you playing a certain like creature like this. Then you get Decisive Denial. It's another interesting card here. I do actually enjoy it as well for that Simic color. Because it's actually pretty interesting on the fact that we get to choose one. Target creature control doesn't we control fights target creature control, so it's a fight spell in that ability. And then it's a counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3. So in the early game, or until if your opponent's ramping up, you know, in the early game you can have an open counter spell for non-creature spells. That makes your opponent pay more or taxes your opponent if they want to pay that creature, or you can fight a creature, which is also very good. So definitely a very unique spell in the fact that I can do one of other. I do find it fairly strong for this style of the deck just because of that. Then we got Zimone, the Quandrix Prodigy. It's another 2 mana legendary creature, human wizard. It's a 1/2, which is not the strongest creature, but it's definitely the abilities here are what are interesting about it. It's 1 mana. We can put a land card from our behind onto the battlefield tapped. So another card that has built-in ramp. For 4 mana, we can draw a card, and then if we control 8 or more lands, we draw 2 cards instead. So as we get into the later game, especially with a lot of the ramp we have in the deck, we then can start pumping out 2 card draws at the end of our opponent's turn or something like that before our turn to kind of keep our hand full and keep our momentum going. Then another card here we have is Fractal Summoning. It's an X and a blue and a green and a blue and a green. Then we create a 0/0 blue-green fractal creature token with X +1/+1 counters on it. So definitely a good way to spend a lot of our mana that we're ramping up into in the late game for a very large creature. I do think the one downfall is maybe a lot of our fractals don't have trample, which could be a problem. Maybe there's something we can do there to kind of give creatures trample, or just give it like our all our creatures trample. I maybe mess around with that Garruk's Uprising, I think is what it's called. It's maybe an interesting card to maybe put in the deck, see how that works out. But I just kind of want to mess around with a lot of the Strixhaven cards before I add in a lot of other cards from other sets. Then we get Kane, the Dean of Substance, and Embalm, the Dean of Theory. So it's a blue-green like Dean card for the deck. We have to tap it for the green card, exile top card of our library. If it's a land card, we get to put it in our hand. Otherwise, put a study counter on it. And then for 5 mana, we create a 0/0 green blue fractal creature token. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each different mana value among non-land cards we own in exile with study counters on them. So definitely interested in there. I haven't messed around with it a lot. I did draw it a couple of times. I mean, we do have 3 copies in the deck. I did actually up it my normal budget of like 4 rares / mythics in the deck to 5 in this one. But I didn't get to mess around with it a lot. But definitely maybe interesting to see how that works out in the late game. And then on the flip side, we do have the blue Dean on it, which is a 3/3 flyer. We can tap X and 2 blue, exile top X cards of our library. You get to put a study counter on each of them. Then we may put a card we own from exile with a study counter on it into our hand. So definitely a good, interesting way to kind of get these cards back. That may have study counters on them if they're in exile. I do think these two work in tandem, so I do think it's one of those things. If you can, maybe try to get them out on the battlefield. So it's definitely interesting there because the way I read her on the one side, it does say exile. So she doesn't really have an ability to kind of get those cards back to our hand, but definitely interesting there. Then we have the Biomathematician. There we go. Say that 10 times fast. When it enters the battlefield, we can create a 0/0 green blue fractal creature token, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each fractal we control. So definitely a good way in the later game, especially when we start pumping out fractals, to kind of get this one large fractal based on how many other fractals there are on the battlefield. So definitely pretty interesting there. And also in the early game, maybe you can kind of ramp up and get a 3/3 or a 4/4 pretty early. So definitely also pretty cool. Then we play in Golden Ratio, which is another interesting one here because we're playing these fractals that could be all different powers and toughnesses based on X condition. We do play this card because we get to draw a card for each different power among creatures we control. So if we have fractals all over different token sizes, we're going to draw a lot of cards, which could be definitely very beneficial to us, especially if our hand's pretty depleted. So definitely pretty interesting on what this does there. So I also added in Kasmina because she creates fractals on her own. I was like, if I'm playing fractals, I have to have Kasmina. I do think it's maybe if you don't have the Mythic Caster, I do think it's something you want to get for the deck because of its fractal ability, where you can -X and make a fractal that's has X +1/+1 counters on it. Though I wouldn't do it on turn 1 unless you want to create a 1/1 because she does only have 2 loyalty for only being a 3 casting cost planeswalker. Though she's actually fairly interested in what she does. Her initial ability, or her static ability, is each other planeswalker we control has the loyalty abilities of Kasmina herself. So essentially, whatever planeswalker you may have besides her will have these 3 abilities. But the +2 is Scribe 1, which is definitely very good. You know, you can set yourself up maybe for a possible card that you can take advantage of on the following turn. And then if you get to the -8, you get to search your library for an instant or sorcery card that shares a color with this planeswalker. Exile that card, then shuffle your library. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So definitely interested in there. It will take a little bit of work. I mean, depending on how quickly your opponent can ramp up, you would have to probably protect Kasmina until you get there. But definitely interested in there. Then into our kind of more expensive cards in the deck, we have Serpentine Curve. It's a 4-mana sorcery spell that creates 0/0 green-blue fractal. Put X+1/+1 counters on it, where X is 1 plus the total number of instants of sorcery cards we own in our exile and our graveyard. So this is actually where it gets interesting. Combine that with one of these two, and also, you know, us playing these cards, we can actually take advantage of this and get make these large fractal creatures for pretty relatively cheap mana. You know, if we have, depending on how many we have, you know, so maybe you have 4 or 5 when you play this on turn 4, which is actually not that bad. And then we have Leyline of Invocation. It's another card here. It's 6 mana, is fairly on the expensive side, but we create a 0/0 green-blue fractal creature token where put X+1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of lands you control. So this is kind of like our big creature that is our big payoff for us ramping so hard to kind of get as many lands out on the battlefield. So definitely a pretty good card also. And then going into the mana base, we have 6 islands, 6 forests. We have 4 copies of the campus, just because, you know, we're going to have a lot of mana, so we're probably going to want to take advantage of that scry ability. We have 4 Thornwood Falls and 4 Evolving Wilds. So a pretty decent balance of mana. It is 24 mana. I do think we have a lot of ways to ramp into it, so I do think 24 is okay. And then, of course, we have our lesson board. We have, you know, environmental sciences for a little bit of extra, you know, we want to maybe possibly look for a particular land. And we also have a mixture of expanded anatomy, which is another 3 mana card. Put 2+1/+1 counters to target creature and make it vigilance on a turn. And, you know, we have 1 introduction to prophecy. I think in this deck, you know, I didn't actually add in any sort of direct removal other than what's in the deck itself. But, you know, this is something you can always swap around. Like I said, I think lessons are definitely going to be interesting to kind of see how they play out overall. But yet again, it's definitely an interesting deck. One thing I could probably say would be pretty cool for the deck to actually have it in here, if you do have any copies, is probably Vorinclex, because we are playing a lot of things that are going to come in with +1/+1 counters on them, plus a Vorinclex. You can actually, you know, make some crazy fractal creatures plus a Vorinclex. Also will help you ramp up Kasmina pretty quickly. So definitely something to kind of keep an eye out for. I honestly don't know what other planeswalkers you could actually put with Kasmina that would take advantage of this. Maybe Jace from, you know, Zendikar Rising. Trying to think of maybe a Garruk. Especially Garruk would be pretty good, because the Garruk from M21, because he'll be able to give your creature +3/+3 trample, which should definitely help you out there, and also have the abilities of all this. There's definitely some things to think about. I do think are some rares and possibly more mythics I didn't add that you could probably always throw in the deck that are probably in that Simic thing. I do think that most of the color bases are based on all the schools that they announced, so there's not really any enemy things. I think everything's like friendly schools, so that is the one thing I did notice when I was looking through the multi cards. So like I said, guys, if you like the video, hit that like button. I have all the links for the decks down below in the description in case you want to check them out and import them yourself, maybe test them out, see what you want to do, and maybe try to how to evolve them from this base kind of idea to maybe make them a little bit more on the competitive side. Let me know what your feedback is, what deck is maybe your favorite. And if you are new here, want to post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video. So this is one of those things I noticed after I recorded. I didn't really notice before I recorded this video that how close I was to 2K subscribers here on YouTube. So I just wanted to say thank you to all you guys who have subscribed to the channel to get me to 2K. I think we just got to 1K in November, and us to be in a 2K, and it's only been like 6 months since we got there, is pretty crazy. So I just wanted to say thank you to you guys real quick, and let's get back to the video.